I am Ria. I have recently joined Designer and I'm the chapter lead for the Pune chapter. So we have a lot of exciting things coming up for the Pune chapter. If you haven't followed the Instagram page, go do that first. We have Shravani here with us today. She is, I've known her for the past 2, 3 years and she's been a personal mentor. She's a hidden gem, honestly. You can't find her on Instagram. You'll see her here and there on the Monsoon Fish page. But I'm revealing her especially for all of you all. And we're hosting our first two events in Pune as well at Monsoon Fish Design Studio, which is going to be towards the end of July. So definitely stay tuned for that. Tawni here is the studio head for Monsoon Fish Design Studio, as well as she's the co-founder of a UX audit product called My UX Core. So do check her LinkedIn profile out, do connect with her there. She's an amazing person to talk to and very, very helpful. So over to you, Shravani. Please tell us more about your story.
Hello, hi everybody. Awesome, thanks for that introduction, Ria. Very specific. So, like she said, I am kind of a hidden gem, yes, because I'm not on Instagram. But if you want to meet me, you can come down to the studio for the event on the 26th of July, I think, and that's going to be awesome. So nice to meet you, everybody. I love the energy here. I think there's about, wow, a lot of people online. That's super cool to see. And I know you all are hyped for the hackathon. It's going to be really interesting of all the stuff I've been hearing around. And I think you all have already had some sessions on some other topics on design, UI, UX design, some research, etc. So I'm here today to help you figure out how to, get to a UX solution and the UI part of it. And I know, people on this call are coming from all kinds of backgrounds. Some of you are already into design probably, so you might already, know all of this stuff. But I would love to share some of, stories from my experience over the years and some tips and tricks to, get it first time right or fail fast, that kind of a thing. So excited to meet you all. Yes, thank you, Vansh, for that. That's very helpful. That's us. And so I'll keep an eye on the chat if anybody, wants to ask any questions. We'll also do a Q&A at the end. But I will get started with a little bit of a small presentation that I have, and we will just dive into it. If everybody can see my screen, put a one. I think that's the protocol. One. Okay. Sure. All right. Cool. All right. Perfect. I'm gonna hide this a little bit. All right, so let's get started. And so I'm sure everyone's heard about UI, UX. It's everywhere. It's all over Instagram. It's all over LinkedIn. It's like the new trend out there. It's been like that for a while, actually. And so all of us, of course, probably already care about it, right? But I will dive a little deeper into what exactly it is, where it came from a little bit, and how to sort of hack into it, right? Without spending 3 4 years of studying of design. So I'm Shravani, and I head the studio, like Ria said, at Monsoon Fish. We are a user experience design agency based out of Pune, and over the many years we've been working with a bunch of clients across all kinds of domains that you can think of. Like I can't even count the number of projects we've done now, but each project has been so interesting and unique. And I will talk a little bit more about that also today, just to give you a glimpse on how things go in the UX domain, right? And let's get right into it. So I'm sure all of you already know what user experience and user interface is, right? I want to take a quick vote sort of a thing of, do you are you like a UX person or a UI person? If you're a UI person, put a UI in the chat. If you're a UX person, put UX in the chat. Can we get both? Oh, we have both. Amazing. All right. All right. I love the people who are like both. Awesome. Perfect. So, I'm assuming that you guys already understand the difference between UI UX. I want to do a little bit of clarification there because in the industry today, UI and UX terms are used very interchangeably. Everyone calls everything a UI, everyone calls everything a UX. There is no clear differentiation. And I also talk about why it is important to understand the differentiation, right? So, typically, the user experience would be uh, the experience that a person or your target audience is getting out of an interface, right? And so the interface is the tangible outcome, like the physical or digital product, let's say, which you see on the apps or websites. The user experience is what the user feels when they use your interface, right? So this differentiation is kind of important to understand when we actually design, and when we're, you guys, since you all are going to be, creating solutions as part of the hackathon now. Important to understand this differentiation so that you can make solutions the right way and intentionally design for both sort of aspects of the solution, right? And so if we talk about user experience, all of us have used Zomato and Spotify so many times, right? You all have probably seen the interface so many times that it just feels natural now. At this point, you don't even notice that, oh, this button has this kind of a, radius or color. It's just so intuitive that it's almost invisible. At the same time, it's also memorable, right? But when you actually talk about the user experience, this is just the outcome or the front face that you see. What's actually going on is this, right? This is the user experience, and that is the interface with which the users are interacting. And so, a lot of times, we tend to get looped into creating screens and we forget about the user, which is something that's very important to intentionally keep in mind. So, we'll talk a little bit more about how to go about doing that. But the solutions that you all will be creating in the hackathon would be for your end users, right? Through the medium of the interface. So, that's something really important to keep in mind. So, let's do a small exercise, right? Uh, User experience design actually started out in the real world, not on mobile phones, right? So it's, as a term, it's been around for maybe like a decade or so, a little more than that. But the concept of user experience has been around since humanity has been around, right? Everything that we experience as humans is a user experience. So we being the user, the human being the user, and the situations we are in or the environment we are in being the experience, right? So this is an example of a real world UX design, right? So let's imagine that your parents are out of town and you've got the house to yourself and you're like totally into it and you're going to be like, I'm going to call all my friends home, have a house party, all of that. And so when you start to plan this party, or if when you invite people over to your house, uh, there are two aspects to this. One is the user, which is your guests who are going to be coming into your house, and the actual party being the experience. Now, there might be many elements to this party, right? There might be music, there might be food, there might be the living room space, how you clean it up, because that's important. How you decorate it. Maybe there are lights, maybe there's drinks, whatever, right? So all of that sort of adds on to the experience of the party and which is created for the user. Right. So in this situation, the guest is your user, the party is your experience, and the interface is actually probably your space where you're hosting it and where you've created the experience, right? So that's a tangible part of the experience. Now, what's interesting is that this concept of experience design has been around for a very long time. Since decades, humans have been creating experiences in the form of parties or social gatherings or homes, even residential spaces are an experience. All kinds of infrastructure, let's say the metro, that's an experience, right? Every single aspect of the human day-to-day life is an experience that is created by somebody for somebody, except for nature, maybe that's created just probably designed in a much more sophisticated way than humans can ever imagine. But any human-made experience was intentionally curated through for the user, right? Um, so very interesting. Now taking that metaphor to UX design and like let's say physical products. Maybe you've seen this meme. How many of you have? seen this meme around. Uh, if you have, put a one or a yes in the chat. Yes, everyone's seen this, right? Awesome. Okay, cool. So, like, do you get this, right? So, a lot of times we sort of jump into UI, creating the product. It looks so cool. It's so cute. It's gonna sell right off the shelves. It's amazing. And we kind of forget the functionality of it, right? And that's when this happens. So, moral of the story being, painful moral of the story being, don't jump to creating UI on Figma, right? We really gotta think of the functional aspect of creating an experience before actually executing the final outcome. And that's something we will cover in detail in the next few sections as well. Yeah. So weirdly, and this is something, sorry, I'm gonna try to minimize the chat. Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is something that's it's a weird math of the digital world, right? So a lot of times we use UX, UI interchangeably. And actually, if you think about it, the user experience and the user interface together make the overall experience. Typically, this is called customer experience or, just user experience. But when we sort of try to break it down, it is a combination of both these things, which is interesting and important to remember. So, why I'm emphasizing so much on the UX of it is because I have seen in my experience a lot of people jumping into solution mode, execution mode, creating interfaces that look super amazing. They are super amazing, look very interesting, delightful, all of that. But a lot of times they're not usable or they're not solving the right problems. And I'm sure a large part of the hackathon judgment criteria would be about how viable the solution is, how thought through the solution is, and what sort of impact it's going to make, etc. Right? So a large part of UX solutioning or digital solutioning, let's say, is identification and specification of the right problems, right? And let's say tomorrow you're going to get the problem statement, right? All of you. Um, Identifying and dissecting that problem statement would be one of the most important exercises, I would say, throughout the process of the solutioning that you do, even more than, let's say, the execution of the screens. Um, because unless you're solving the right problem, you're probably not going to arrive at the right solution, right? So let's take a maybe let's take a real world example. Um, so let's say I don't know, your mom asks you to get some vegetables from the market, right? And uh, you're like, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't have the time, whatever, right? And then your mom is like, why? Why are you not getting me vegetables? It's such a basic, simple thing. What is the problem? And then you're like, because I don't have any money, you need to give me money, right? So identifying the right problem in this scenario would end up creating the right solution. If, let's say, you're not able to identify the actual problem, uh, you're probably not in a good space to get to a solution and then solve the problem, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about now how to go about identifying the problem. And this is a little bit this is something you might want to note for later because it'll be important as you go through the process of solutioning. So this is like a very crisp version of the UX process, like a very lightning version. And if you get these four things right, then your solution will have highest probability of making it, I would say, right? So let's take the first one. Um, One a very important question to ask yourself is who is going to be using this and defining the user. Now, we're very used to defining the user in a very loose format generally, right? That, oh, all teenagers under the age of 18 are going to use my product, or everybody is going to use my product, or, all of that. But really getting to specifics around who your user is, really understanding them in depth and defining your target audience will help you niche out into a niche out into the problem as well. and understand and really design for that user in mind, because large scale solutions who just solve for everybody are very very complex in nature, and that's probably like a whole 6-month project, right? But in this context, we are looking at really solving for a very specific need. Maybe some of that is defined by the problem statements, maybe some of that is defined by some assumptions or definition of audience that you guys make as a group in context to your statement. But really defining who this user is who's going to consume your solution is critical and a very foundational start point for this process, right? So that's the first part, who's going to use this. Now that we have that out of the way, we move on to what do they need right now. And this again comes down to really understanding who they are, because that's when you're in a good place to say, this is what our users need right now in this situation, right? A lot of these two parts are about persona creation, which we will look into more detail again in the next part as well. Really understanding and defining what they need, what they want is critical to getting to the crux of the problem statement, right? And once we have that in place, we move on to understanding how do they get this today. So, very critical, and this is a step which a lot of designers skip, is like a product market fit kind of a situation, or let's say a solution market fit kind of a situation, where we are not really checking if your actual solution is right. We are just understanding how they solve this need that they have in today's time when your solution doesn't exist, right? So let's take an example of taking notes. Like, let's say my user is somebody who really wants to take a lot of notes throughout their day. Maybe they have a lot of inputs and information consumption which they want to record, right? When there were no digital tools around, people used to write them down on notepads or whiteboards or blackboards, right? And keep notebooks that are recorded. I'm sure some of you all still do it, but in today's age, a lot of us use digital tools to record information and document them. You might be using Notion or notes or slides, documents, whatever, right? At the time when there were no digital tools, it was important to understand how people noted down information in today's day and age, and then say, oh, you know what? We want to change this behavior from people taking physical notes to digital notes. And how does that look like? Right? So, understanding the current situation and then also mapping it to how we envision it transitioning to your solution would be an interesting lens to look at it, right? The fourth part would be how can our solution bridge that gap better? So this is the main value add of your solution, right? So now that you know your user, you know what they need, how they behave today. The last part is understanding, does your solution really bridge that gap? Does it really add value so much so that they would transition and switch from their existing habit to the new habit? And the existing habit may not be a digital solution, it could be a physical product, it could be a habit that they have, and really adding value to that user so that they feel, oh, this is a new way to do this and it's much better to do it this way. That's when you have the right solution for that target audience and that problem statement, right? So these are the main four key questions that you might want to keep asking yourselves throughout the process of the hackathon, that you sort of, when you create solutions, keep going back to the users, what do they need, how do they do this today, and how do we do that better with our solution, right? And so one point that I want to emphasize on is uh, UI UX is not about screens, it is about decision flows. What I mean by decision flows is really understanding in the real world how the users are interacting, not just with the app or the solution, the digital interface, but with their environment that they're using that interface inside, right? And really designing for that real world situation that your users are going to be in, right? So let's move ahead. It's just an example. I think someone's asking a question. If we try to communicate sometimes with the target user, it becomes very difficult for us to understand them. Sometimes it's very in-depth as they get use of current solutions. So, Aviral, I just try to answer that quickly. I think you're asking how do you sort of gauge from the user what they mean? And I'm guessing that's your question. It's a great question because I think you had a research session yesterday, and I'm sure you've got some tools and tips to sort of research and understand your users, maybe. One very sort of easy, interesting, low effort way is to understand, observe your user. So asking them questions is one way to get data, yes. Sometimes people say things that they don't mean also. So you might want to observe the user uh, in their environment, right? And yes, Vansh, I will do Q&A in the end. Sorry, I will just answer this one question and move ahead. Yeah. So it's important to observe the user in their environment and with that observation, draw your own conclusions because I'm sure you guys have heard this old meme. If Henry Ford asked people what they wanted, they would say, "We want fast horses," right? But you don't always get the answers from your users. So observing them, coming to your own conclusions, that is the value add that we are doing with this solution, right? Okay, let's do Q&A at the end, and let's move ahead in the presentation now. Sorry, I'm just gonna hide this. All right. So let's take this example, very interesting example. And that's Mukesh right on the left here, right? So Mukesh has a problem. He wants to get healthy. That's his problem statement, right? It's a large problem. He doesn't know how to go about it. He doesn't know how to start solving this problem. All of the people he's been talking to, they've been telling him different things like, oh, you should try this diet. Oh, you should go to the gym every day. Oh, come, let's run in the morning. You should not eat carbs, you should not eat sugar, all of that stuff. But he has no clue what will work for him. And that's exactly what dissecting a problem looks like. So, as a designer, if Mukesh asks you, you know what, as part of this hackathon, give me a solution to this problem statement. How do I get healthy? I really want to get healthy, right? And as a designer, you would ideally not jump to conclusions, I hope. Uh, Not tell him or advise him on solutions right away. You would try to ask him a few questions and understand where he's placed as a user, right? So Mukesh is your user, and that's your problem statement. So what kind of questions would you frame to ask Mukesh? Um, you would probably want to understand what kind of effort he's willing to put into this, what kind of motivation he has, why is he doing this, what kind of money he's willing to invest in this problem statement, what kind of time is he okay putting into this, what kind of activities does he like or not like, or does he prefer doing anything specific? What are his usual food habits? Does he have access to a kitchen? Does he have access to some ingredients? Or is he a vegetarian or not? All kinds of these questions are really important for, as a designer, for us to suggest to Mukesh that, you know what, buddy, this is the right solution for you, right? And I would recommend that as a designer, you would, or as someone in like creating solutions, not even a designer, someone who's creating solutions, to not jump into solution mode right away. To really break down the problem statement by asking a few questions which are relevant to that user and context, and really framing a problem statement out of it. So let's look at what kind of problem statement we have framed for Mukesh, right? We have asked Mukesh a bunch of questions, and he has given us a few answers on those questions. And now his problem statement is changed, or let me say, evolved from a single statement, which is super generic, non-specific, to something that is very, very specific and can be solved for. So now Mukesh's statement is, I want to be able to climb a flight of stairs without getting breathless because I want to be energetic enough and I want to do this along with managing other aspects of my life. Right? So there are a few clues in this statement if you notice very carefully. One clue that I see right away is his time commitment, answer to his time commitment. He wants to do this along with managing other aspects of life. That's the amount of time Mukesh is willing to give. So that's non-negotiable for him that he will probably invest a few hours, like and maybe an hour every day for this so that he can do other things as well. He's not like, he doesn't want to become like a full-time professional athlete, train 5 hours a day or anything like that. So we know where Mukesh is placed at in terms of time investment. Now let's try to find some other clues in this problem statement. If you guys find any clues, you can put that in the chat. Yeah, I will take a look at that. I see weight, yes. So I'm not sure how you got weight from this, but we don't have actually any information about Mukesh's weight right now. But yes, he does want to be energetic. So that's his goal. That's the amount of like level of fitness he wants to reach. Breathless is a problem he has right now. That's a pain point. He's probably getting breathless when he's climbing a flight of stairs. So he wants to change that, right? Another interesting thing would be motivation. I think energetic is something that his motivation is. He probably wants to feel energetic throughout the day. That's his motivation or goal, right? And so he doesn't want to like run a half marathon or anything. That's the definition of healthy for Mukesh. Now that we have a lot more information about Mukesh, I think as solution givers, we are in a better position to suggest to Mukesh that, you know what, buddy, this is what you should try to do. This is what you should try to eat, right? So I hope you understand where this story is going to. Um, how much data can a problem statement give you, right? Sometimes you have to extract that. Sometimes you get it ready-made. Sometimes there are some assumptions involved, but for your solution, it's important to define these sort of parameters to get to the right kind of solution and to the right kind of niched digital product, right? So I think the moral of the story is that you have your user, you have a problem statement. Now it's how much depth you can go into when you try to understand and dice down the problem so that you're in a better position to get to the right solution, right? And this is something you might want to try with your problem statements tomorrow, is that, first thing you do when you get those statements is define your user, but then ask 100 questions. Maybe 100 is an overkill. Ask at least 20, 25 questions to your group or between yourselves about how do we sort of really break this down? What are the parameters we don't have, or what are the parameters we should assume right now, right? So that would be like the first step of getting to a solution. So now that we're talking about the process a little bit, I want to jump into a little bit more depth around the actual process. So I'm calling this a shortcut to a good experience because if it's done well, it's really a shortcut. If it's done badly, it's a really, really long cut. And I've seen a lot of people trying to get to a solution really quickly, but then it's actually gonna take you in loops if not done well, right? So I would say pace yourself. It's like it's like running a marathon. If you run too fast, you're not gonna make it to the finish line. If you run too slow, you're probably not gonna make it in right time. So pace yourself throughout the whole process and go step by step. Don't jump to the design solution right away. Yeah. So um once you sort of understand and break down the question that like we did in the previous step, we are now at a stage where we have enough information, right? And so we are in a better position to frame your problem statement, but in a manner that is solution focused. So what I mean by that is instead of just saying, I want to get healthy, your problem statement is now, how might we help Mukesh, who is, let's say, in his 30s and has a full-time job, get, uh, how can we help Mukesh climb a flight of stairs despite, having only an hour a day to invest, working out or whatever, right? So it's very specific now. And so your how might we statement will help you or nudge you to a solution. And so if you look at these statements, they are framed in a way that really sort of gets your brain into idea zone or solution zone, where you're trying to sort of have multiple ideas for for Mukesh, let's say, right? And interestingly, this can be done not just for UX problems, it can be done for any other real world problems as well. So it would be amazing if you guys take this ahead and apply it to real life. But let's stick to the context right now. So a few more examples that I want to walk you through is how might we help students plan better despite distractions? Or how might we help farmers access weather updates without having smartphones? So you see that not always that the solution is probably is inside an interface or an app only. It could be a combination of real world ecosystem solution along with a digital solution. That's also something to think about in your design pitches that you will do for the hackathon is how can we make this a complete ecosystem solution and not just an app that is just sitting in someone's phone not being used, right? How can we pair it up and make the whole experience, the real world experience and the digital experience, something that's actually useful and valuable for our users, right? How might we help commuters pay tolls without stopping? This is something that probably is a problem statement for FASTag, maybe, right? So, a very interesting exercise is usually that we do is we take the solution or the product and we reverse engineer how might we statements to it. So, let's say, take for example, I don't know, Uber. Maybe we can do a quick fun exercise. So, what would be in the chat, if you can add that. If Uber was a solution, what would be a how might we statement for Uber? I know it's a little bit long to type, but if anybody has some ideas around what might be the how might we statement when a bunch of designers were creating Uber, let's say. Anybody? It's a little long to type now. Okay, we'll get to it later. Maybe you can just put it in the chat, maybe. We'll get back to it. So I'm asking Neeraj that if Uber was your solution, what would be the how might we statement for Uber? So let's take an example. How might we help commuters pay tolls without stopping? Is probably a how might we statement for FASTag as a solution, right? So maybe you can put your statements in the chat and we'll get to it later. I think Vansh got it right. How might we help commuters travel faster despite local taxis? Yes, that's interesting. Exactly. How might we make it easier for new users? Yes. So, like you see, everyone's has a different perspective also of one solution. It's interesting to note actually. Uber was probably not made to solve only a singular problem, but many different problems. And so it's interesting to notice that when you get a problem statement, how can you create how might we statements from multiple points of views or different points of views for your singular problem statement and then solve for all of them together as part of your product solution, right? That's a very interesting point. Thanks, guys, for sharing your statements. Awesome. Okay, so now once you have your how might we statements, it's very important to define your target audience. Like we said before, your target audience definition is not just templatized persona creation. I've seen that a lot happening in the industry as well. People just make persona so that they look nice and they don't really actually go into the depths of it. That's not going to be useful for you guys, right? And for anybody for that matter. Personas are really your anchor points and they really define your design decisions later on. So, personas are for those of you who don't know or might be new to this, personas are like a profiling of your target users, really trying to understand their personalities, a little bit of demographics as well, but also what their motivations might be, what their frustrations might be, what their goals might be in life, what kind of position they might be, or the industry they might be, where might they live, from everything from habits, micro habits, anything that seems relevant to your problem statement can go into the persona. So I would advise to take all the templates that you find with a grain of salt. The templates are great as a start point that you find online, but really curate and customize it to your context. Sometimes understanding their career goals may or may not be relevant to your problem statement. Sometimes it might be relevant, right? So, what you put into a persona, of course, the basics are always foundational, but add on to that, how can you make this profile richer and richer as you really understand your user in depth will be important. And it'll be sort of your anchor point to any design decisions that you make later on in the process of creation and execution of the experience, right? So a little bit of some do's and don'ts around personas because I have very strong opinions about personas not being useful. Um, it's not a fictional story. It's not, you know, fancy, Jane
Um,
Doe and all of that.
guys, can you hear Shravani ma'am?
Hello, can you hear me?
Guys, press one if you can hear. Okay, okay, got it.
You can? Okay, cool, cool. Sorry, was I not audible? Okay, I think you can. Okay, perfect. So as I was saying, there are sometimes we end up creating fictional stories out of personas, and that's not very productive for you guys later on in the process. You'll find that the persona is not really helping your design decisions. It's very important to ground your personas in the real world. If you're designing for India, if you're designing for a local audience, really ground your personas to match that personality type, their lifestyles, their profiling, right? These are not fictional, blonde people, good quality pictures out there, right? If, of course, your audience is global, that's a different story. Second point is don't create a lot of personas because you're going to find it difficult to solve for all of them. Focus on two or three. That's a good number to be in, like a good range to be in. That gives you enough room for adding multiple features at the same time, keeping your solution to a very clear niche, right? And make sure your personas are slightly different from each other. So the whole point of personas is that it represents a part of your audience, right? So if you know a group of people have similar traits, similar lifestyle, similar habits, that's your persona, which sort of represents that group of people. Similarly, you might have another group of people which represents a little bit of a different trait. At the same time, they are looking for a similar solution, right? So two to three is a good range to be in my experience. And the third one being, like I said, personas are living documents. They are not static, you just like put it in and forget it kind of a documentation. Because as you go through the project, you might learn more about these people. At every stage in the process, you might be, bouncing off ideas off of a user persona, probably, or potential customers, maybe. And as you get more information, even if you're at the UX stage or the UI stage, it's always nice to keep that persona document as a living document and keep evolving it as you get more data on your personas. And a little bit of a do's, like I said, base it on real information. It's not fictional. Focus on behavior and habits a lot because that's your real golden pieces of data that's going to define your design decisions. And keep it practical and simple. Don't need to overcomplicate it by writing multiple pages of personas, right? So um, always use your personas as an anchoring for your design. Anytime you all are debating in your groups about, oh, ye acha lag raha hai, ya wo acha lag raha hai, you know that your user persona is the person to ask, ki, as a user or even empathize if you don't have access to your real users, is would my user find this interesting or would my user use this particular thing or how would my user make this decision? And that's where your answer lies, right? So any kind of debates like that can be solved with anchoring using these persona documents. Cool. Moving to the next part. This is the user story or the ecosystem definition. And again, this is a very important step because I've seen a lot of times that this step is skipped and then we end up designing for a very fictional story, which is not really happening in the real world, right? So, I'm sure you might have heard of the story of the founders of Airbnb, where when they started off, they actually went physically to locations which were potential Airbnbs. They really stayed there. They themselves took pictures of the properties and used the tool to sort of get into a understanding of how their hosts might be going through the whole journey of putting a property online or on their platform, right? And that's a great example of how a user story really shapes the interface. A lot of times we design in silo, like in without understanding the real world scenarios. And with the minute you add this real world scenario uh, into your thinking, it completely changes what kind of decisions you're making on your design, right? So anytime you think of, let's say, even a shopping app or a Uber, they have done a lot of research around how real world scenarios affect decision making. I'm sure they did a very India specific research or user journey when they started off in the country, because our situations are very different from, let's say, in the States or in any other geography, right? So it's important to understand that successful products understand the real world scenario and they solve a very real world problem. It's not that your user is going to come on the app or the platform or the website for because it looks nice or just because it has an interesting feature. No, they're going to come here because they really see value in it in a real world scenario and it complements that scenario, right? So it's important to sort of create a journey of your users in the real world and then identify the touch points of your app or your platform in that journey. So you know that, oh, this is the point when my user is going to be interacting with the app. This is the mood they might be in. This is the irritation that they might be feeling. How do I design in a way that caters to that or solves that for them in that situation, right? And like this, there might be so many use cases and so many corner cases to solve for. But of course, while you design for the hackathon, you would prioritize maybe five or six of them. It's a good sort of average, five or six important critical touch points, and design for those would be a good number, right? Um, Yeah. So about this, I think this is sort of not correct, but anyway, I will talk about it. Uh, the journeys are really important to highlight the emotions and friction points because then you know in the real world what the user is feeling while using it. So I'm sure many of you might have been really annoyed with waiting times on Uber, let's say, and they keep you engaged for a while. How many of you seen that thing where they say we are connecting you to a driver in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then it goes on forever, right? If you have seen that, put one in the chat, right? That is a very intentional design decision, actually. It keeps you hooked for at least 4 to 5 minutes because you feel like you are going to get connected to some driver. And it might not be really accurate. It's again a different conversation about dark patterns and all that. We'll not get into that today. But it's a very intentional choice, and they really understand that this might be a problem in the real world, where the user is in a hurry to catch a cab, they're not getting a driver. How do we still keep them on the app so that they don't go to an Ola or a Rapido in that 2 3 minutes time, right? So Uber is always trying to optimize for this time that they have the user on the app. So now let's move on to the architecture and flows. Now we are getting into more depths, like you see, uh, more technical, right? But very critical steps. So once we have the user journeys mapped and the personas mapped, we have all of this in place. It's really now time to go into the solution mode. And this is where your information architecture and user flows come into the picture. Now we are really thinking of how the user is interacting with the app, right? So now this is about defining your user flows on the app itself while keeping in mind the friction points and the moods and all of that of the user based on your journey. So here we are really trying to define how the user's journey on the app is. So like you see here, on the right side, you see that the app is being navigated through. On the left, you see the architecture definition of it, right? So you see that the user is navigating through multiple pages and how each page is connected to the other page, what information is visible here. Now, you might feel that this is start point and this is not, but actually it's the other way around. When we design, we create the architecture first, we define the flows first, which then are converted into actual wireframes or user experience, right? So at the architecture stage itself, we define how what the user is going to see on each page. what button is going to be there, what flow the button is going to take the user to, right? That's really important so that we get the complete picture and there's no end loopholes or the users being taken to something completely different or they're not being navigated at all, right? So the architecture will play an important role in defining the experience. A lot of times people find architecture quite complicated, and I'm here to tell you that a well done architecture, well thought through architecture is very straightforward actually. It need not be very complicated. Pick the key 4 to 5 flows that are really critical to your solution, create those in the architecture, and they will define all the other edge cases, right? So that's a good tactic to do. Try to minimize the dead ends as well, so that every path leads to a loop, and every time the user clicks on something, they're not at a dead end in terms of the flow. Make sure that the architecture is grouped and created based on the user's mental models. What I mean by that is, let's say you know your user is looking for 4 pieces of information when they shop for something online. Maybe it's size, maybe it's color, maybe it's texture, maybe it's price, right? 4 parameters. You know that the user is going to consume these 4 parameters together, right? So, how do you make sure that those 4 pieces of information are grouped together and the user always sees them together? So, in your architecture, you would sort of combine or group those pieces of information so that the user is able to see them together, right? So, it's also very important to be very clear with your flows and take it step by step. Define every step of the process from the point of logging into Uber to completing the onboarding to what they see after the first page. Do they see a information input or a payment setup? Do they see the landing page with the cabs option? Do they see a location? Every specific thing is cleared out in the information architecture. I know some of you might find it a little confusing, but there are a lot of templates out there that help you start off with an architecture. An architecture is basically just a skeleton. If any of you have a, I don't know, science background, you might have learned of algorithms, right? Algorithms are just logical flows which define the path. So an architecture is exactly an algorithm. It just tells you, imagine you're a computer and it just tells you कि A, B, C, D करना है. A से B जाना है, B से C जाना है. C से 2 option है, D या E, right? So that's exactly what an architecture is. And you'll find a lot of templates out there. Of course, take it with a grain of salt again, because a lot of them might be too complicated for your context. It's just a good thumb of rule is to make sure that in your group, to align yourselves, all of you understand the architecture and flow well enough, and you're all aligned on it. And it's an exercise that gives a lot of clarity if done well. If you feel it's too confusing, another way to go is just create user journeys, singular linear user journeys. Those will also define the UX. I would suggest to start with user journeys and then create the architecture if it's too complex. A sitemap is similar to a flow, but it is specifically for websites. And architecture is for applications, SaaS products, platforms, all of that. Yeah. Now coming to the solutioning, okay. Now you've got the architecture and all of that complex stuff is done. Now we're really in solution mode, right? I would really suggest to stay away from Figma at this stage and really put in your ideas on pen and paper, because your brain works much faster than your hands work on Figma, right? So it is potentially what happens when you start off on Figma is that you're constrained by the tool, you're worried about the layout, the fonts, the spacing, all of that. Right now at this stage, you are in ideation mode. You're not in execution mode. So try and put all kinds of ideas down on paper first. As a group, align on that and then move to Figma would be my recommendation. At this stage, you're of course allowed to move around the architecture, make changes in it as these things come to life, as you are able to visualize them better. It's very natural in the process to change things from the architecture at this stage and even later on. Yeah. Um, at this stage, it's important also to not get very attached to your ideas. Don't make one idea and get stuck to it. Try to think in volumes first and then figure out what's the best for your user. Don't think of it from a screen by screen point of view. Think of it from a bigger picture point of view as well. And have enough clarity in the wireframe level itself, like the sketch level itself, so that you guys know what's going to happen in the higher fidelity version. So the vision is what, like you have a vision in your mind and then you're putting it on paper to get your ideas out, right? And align as a group. And that's when then you move on to the wireframing stage. Now, at the wireframing stage, you're actually putting in elements and UX pattern in place, right? And now it's really coming to life. This is based off of the sketches that you made, probably some of them. And now you are in a position to define more intricate elements like the carousels, or what kind of timeline would you use, or what kind of fashion the data would be placed in, right? And then really define what pages you're going to have, what kind of information you're going to have on a page, what kind of features you're going to have. So all of this is defined in the architecture already, and then you're sort of laying it out on paper, or sorry, on digital paper to make it really clear and high fidelity. Yes. Um, Little bit of do's and don'ts to make it really quick for you guys to pick up the wireframes is that there's a lot of templates out there for wireframe elements or kits that help you speed up this process. So you don't have to create each element from scratch when you do this in higher fidelity, right? A good thumb of rule is to not copy blindly the popular patterns and apps. Some of them might be relevant for you. It's great to get inspired by them. It's great to use stereotypes if you think they work for your user, but always think of your user when you sort of get inspired by general apps that are out there. And prioritize key flows. So, especially for the design hackathon part, it'll be important to prioritize the key flows that sort of communicate your idea and not go into too much edge cases, too much specifics on the, you know, other flows or balance flows, like we call them. Prioritize the key flows that tell your story, tell the story of your idea. Yeah. And try and use new age patterns out there. So you see a lot of new UX is evolving every day. So we see new patterns every day out there. So make sure you are using them if they are relevant to your user. Again, your user is your anchor. If you think your user needs to use some older patterns, that's a fair design decision as well. Yeah. We are now coming into a more of a visual or a UI definition kind of a phase where we are trying to really define the uh, look and feel. Yes. Now that we have defined the experience in the previous stage, um, look and feel definition will be critical. So here it's important to understand who your user is, what kind of environments they are in, what kind of interfaces they are looking at, and how might this interface look and feel complement the tasks that they're doing, right? This is just a final version of the visual design. Based on your, yes, that's the mood board in the previous step. Based on your mood board or storyboard, that's when you define your wireframes into the visual design. So I think a lot of complex words are being used. So I'll try to like simplify it a little bit. Your mood board is your, let's say you're building an interior space, you're making a house interior space, yeah? When you do interior design, you create a mood of the living room, let's say. You want this kind of a feel, you want this kind of a texture, you want this kind of a colors. So that's your mood board. And you're taking that mood board and then applying it to your interior design, which is your wall paint, your furniture, your flooring, all of that. It's exactly like that. Wherein the wireframes, as we are building the house, your wireframe is probably your civil work, where you're defining the structure of the room, where the furniture will be, etc. That's your layout. And then you're taking your mood board and applying that mood board to your layout, which actually then creates the whole interface or the living room, right? You're actually now able to see the colors in the real space, on the real furniture, etc. So think of that metaphor every time you go through this process. It's an important process to do because in architecture or in interior design, it's like once you do it, you can't take it back. You can't suddenly change the mood board, right? In digital design, you can to a certain extent, but as a process, it'll be much faster to do it when you have a mood board in place and you don't change it too much later on because it's thought through from a user point of view, right? It's a good metaphor to sort of understand the process clearly. These are some do's and don'ts for the UI version. So good looking is great, but make sure it's functional. Always remember that UX overrides UI. So if you ever are in a situation where you think that something looks great, but it's not functional, then that's not the right way most of the times. If you think that it's looking a little complex, but it's functionally, hitting the right spot, it's okay if it looks complex sometimes. So always remember that UX will override UI. And always try to use stereotypes that the users are used to looking at as well, in the sense that if you think users are, all of us use WhatsApp and that's a known pattern, and your solution has a similar metaphor, try to get inspired by patterns from WhatsApp. It's a great sort of way to take up patterns that your user will end up adopting very quickly because they're used to it, right? So there are a few more things here, like you might see. Don't forget about scalability, consistency. Make sure that the whole flow looks like one product and not multiple different things that are disconnected. You can do that by using consistent fonts, consistent colors, consistent styles, elements, radiuses, iconography, all of that, so that the user doesn't feel like their experience is being broken, basically, right? And the last part would be prototyping. So uh, in today's world, prototyping has become important because your design is not just a static screen anymore. It's actually a story. And to make that story come to life, prototyping is important. Of course, you can do basic prototyping, just click through. Or there are now a lot of tools that help you prototype faster, and I'll cover that in a bit. But Figma has very good capability for prototyping basic flows so that your story is communicated well as part of your solution, right? So that's the last stage of the process. And by the time you're here, I hope now you've got a little bit of understanding of how to do it. I know that some of the complex parts include the architecture and the user flows and all of that. Maybe we can do some Q&A around it, right? I also want to talk a little bit about using these new age tools for this process, because we are now going and moving from a traditional design process where your final outcome was just Figma screens to something that is more real world or usable even, or front end code actually. So of course, in the whole process, you can use GPT to help you with framing and research and all of that. I would suggest to take it with a grain of salt, because like you already know, AI is like a sort of a yes man kind of a situation. If you ask it anything, it will always agree with you, and it'll give you a solution in a very biased way that you want it to give. It might not always be the best way to do it. So I suggest that any solutioning, ideation, etc., keep that to your group and humans. But anything that sort of helps you document things, research, all of that, of course, GPT is your go-to probably, or any AI tool for that matter. Um, Another interesting thing to way to prototype is the new Figma Make and Figma Sites that has been released. It helps you natural language input converts to design output on front end code actually. It might be an interesting way to test out your ideas in real time. I'm not sure of the output of the design hackathon, but it's an interesting way to sort of play around with some solutioning as well. And you might have heard of Lovable and Replit. These are some tools that also use natural language input to create a front end output. You can also upload or input designs into these tools, and then they sort of recreate it if you want to make it more alive and click through, let's say. So, a lot of interesting ways in which you can now prototype in today's time and age. So, I would suggest all of you to explore it, if not use it for the hackathon. And as I think someone said Relium, that's also an interesting tool to try out, definitely. There are a lot of them out there. These are just some of them that I have tried and tested. They work quite well, so worth it to give it a try. I don't know how much time we have. I'm just going to quickly cover some real world examples so that you guys have some context of like the way work design, UI UX design is actually used in the real world. Yes. So sorry, just a second. Awesome. So you've heard a lot of this theory now that, we just spoke about. So much goes into, so much goes into sort of creating a single design screen, right? At the end of it, it might look as simple as this screen, you know, but so much process and thinking goes into creating even one single screen. Gonna close this. Yeah. So I'll give you an example of one of the largest projects that we've been part of a while ago. Of course, you guys must have used the UIDAI Aadhaar website, right? The new version of it is something that we designed at the studio, and a lot of stories around it. But if you see it before, it looked something like this. Now, it's not bad, it's usable, it has tech capabilities and all of that. But a unique problem that they were facing is that nobody was using it because it was so complex to use. And if you think about the user audience of the Aadhaar website, it's every citizen of India, right? It's any person in the village, in the city, people with, limited access to the internet, people with limited digital education even, who may not even understand the basics of navigating on a computer. All kinds of people would use this, right? So this is what it looked like before. And then after a lot of like the whole process that I just spoke about, multiple rounds of some of those steps, for sure, multiple iterations, this is something that you see today live on the portal, and it's being used by the whole country to do multiple tasks which were not possible to do before on the platform. And today, like the goal of this whole exercise was to reduce the number of physical interactions for people, for citizens who want to get basic things done, like updation of information for Aadhaar or changing an address or, all of that kind of stuff, and giving them information. So apart from doing tasks, also giving them information about it, right? Was the primary goal of this exercise. Very challenging because you have all kinds of users. You can't niche into one kind of user, and you have to make sure that it's usable for accessibility, all kinds of digital education levels, all of that, right? So very interesting approach. You don't see a lot of complicated UI here because if you think about it, somebody who is not so educated, who's using this, it's just not functional to have fancy animations there. They don't have internet access. How can they load those animations, right? So you see a very functional and straightforward approach to this outcome of design that you've seen. So the point I'm trying to make is that when you create solutions, it may or may not need to look fancy and animated and very, you know, crazy like that. um, it can be just functional. Of course, if the positioning of the brand is like that, like let's say a Blinkit or a Swiggy, they use these delightful animations because the business works like that the audience is like that, right? So it's very critical. Your design decisions are never right or wrong. They are always governed by your user and your business context or the problem statement context, right? And I want to help you understand that this UX was a very small part of the big ecosystem, right? We had to understand and make sure that the digital platform connects to a lot of physical real world situations. Like if a person is walking into a physical center to do this, how can the database still be the same and the data show up on the app as well? How can that process be seamless? How can data be updated in real time? All of that stuff. So it's very important to understand the ecosystem. Like we saw the customer journey diagram or the user journey diagram. Very important to understand what the touch point of your app is going to be like, right? And this is a very opposite approach that you see here. Like you see the design and the UX and the UI is very high fidelity, futuristic, very sexy looking, if I can use that word. Uh, and here, if we sort of I'll tell you a little bit of context. The user here was a cybersecurity analyst, and this is a product which analysts use for keeping organizations safe. And we had initially created a version of this interface that was very simple, functional, straightforward to use, very usable. We thought that, this is going to work, right? But what we realized later is that people didn't find it interesting and delightful enough and catchy enough to use it. So this user who is sitting in office all day doesn't want to look at a boring interface all day and just monitor it like that, right? They want a interface that feels gamified and interesting and exciting enough, as if they are doing something really interesting, and they want to use it when it feels like that. And so if you look at some of these elements, these could very well be a simple list of information, but it is intentionally designed in a way to make it gamified and interesting so that the user feels that they are part of something much bigger than themselves. They're always on alert and they find it interesting enough to engage throughout the day, right? So you see a stark difference in the approach in the design, and that's primarily because of the user and the business, nothing else. And it required us to really dig deep into the user's mind, mental models, persona, all of that, and understand even the business positioning to get to a solution that really works for that context, right? Um, okay, I think this is playing. I will skip that. Just to summarize, I know we have covered a lot of information, and I want to keep time in check as well. These are some common mistakes that people do when they first try to design or, you know, try to solve a problem statement in a digital format. Make sure that you are keeping these in check always as you go through the process of solving for the design hackathon. And these are some tips that I've already covered in some parts, but this is just to summarize. Always start with the pen and paper is what I would say. It's the best tool at your disposal. Yes, GPT is the new, go-to tool, but let's use your brains sometimes so that they are also exercised. And you will be surprised that you'll be able to get to much better, much sophisticated solutions than GPT can ever give you. GPT is a tool to help you speed up the process, but the real insights will come from your team and yourselves, right? Uh, so to sort of just summarize, I think we've covered a lot of things. And I want to leave you with a very important thing is that understand that the app that you're going to design or the interface that you're going to design is just a medium or a part of the solution. The picture is much bigger than that, right? You might be designing for a much real world larger problem, and your solution or the app is just a medium to get to that solution. And so you might suggest or solve things according to real world solutions and the app itself, right? So keep that in mind. Make sure you don't lose your eyes on the bigger picture while solving for the screen. Yes, the screens are important. The experience is very important, and they will work only when your eyes are on the bigger picture. Yeah. So I'll leave you with that. And I think I just want to wish everybody all the best. And I'm sure you guys will kill it. And I think we have some time to take some Q&A now. Am I right, Vansh? Is that okay?
Yes, we
Awesome.
can start the Q&A. All of you can
Perfect.
drop any questions you have. Yes, we have our first question. Oh, okay.
Yeah. How to use
Okay.
AI in our complete work process, like in UX stage. Okay. So I'll just take Akhilesh's question first. So Akhilesh,
Ma'am,
I think, yeah,
you can stop sharing.
I can stop sharing. Okay, perfect. Awesome. I can see everybody now. All right. Okay, should we start with the first question? Unlike real life
Yes.
projects, how can we measure metrics for case studies or hackathon projects? I'm guessing you mean impact metrics or success metrics, right, Vashti? So, simple answer to that is in hackathons or these kind of projects, the success metric is predefined by the criteria of winning, and of course keep that in mind, but also make sure that your solution actually adds value to the end user and solves the real problem. So I would say that it's a mixture of the criteria and actual value add that would be success metrics for your project. Yay, cat. I love that. Okay. How do we know that we have enough insight to proceed further in the process? So you will never have enough insight to proceed in the process. At a stage, you just have to be like, you know what, guys, I think we need to move on. and this is the amount of data we have. It's okay to make assumptions for sure. We all the time make assumptions, even in the professional industry. A lot of it is based on assumptions. It's important to call out an assumption so that it is very intentionally aligned to whoever is consuming it. So there will be times where you will not have enough data. You will not know that we have enough insight or we have enough data, but you still move ahead making assumptions, and that's absolutely fine. How many of the mood boards are usually drafted and pitched? Can you maybe elaborate a little on the mood board? So, Harsha, mood boards are basically for the defining the look and feel and the style. So I would say that initially you might start off with 3 to 4 ideas, but you align as a team on one idea so that you can take that idea and apply it to your wireframes and move on to the next stage. So that is good enough. When you make a mood board, it is a combination of imagery, colors, fonts, UI elements, even that all come together to create a feeling or a mood. That's what a mood board simply is. And as long as you think that the user can relate to this mood or they're aligned to that, that should be good enough. Okay. I have noticed some discussion about low fidelity mostly being a waste of time. What are your thoughts on that? I do not have very strong opinions about low fidelity wireframes. I do not think it's a waste of time. I think what a waste of time is that designing on Figma, iterating around multiple times. Of course, if you're super quick on Figma and you can think on the go, it's great. I think it works a little differently for different people. If you are able to do that, awesome. Go ahead and skip low fidelity, go to high fidelity. But I would suggest to be very intentional about it. Sometimes I've seen a lot of people getting looped in the Figma layouts and then getting stuck to very specific patterns because you're designing a high fidelity directly. On low fidelity, you have more mind space and freedom for ideas to flow. So that's why I say fidelity as well. How important is the design system in the process? So design systems come into picture when we talk about scalability most of the times. When you are working on very complex projects, very large flows, which I'm not sure if this is going to be part of the hackathon, but the design systems will come into the picture at that stage because you need to make sure every element is consistent and development teams can easily pick that up without creating every element by scratch. But I would suggest that at this stage, even a style guide is useful. So, a difference between a style guide and a design system is that a style guide defines primary components, as many as you need, just for that part of the flow. And then you have set style for that time. It doesn't probably scale to a huge sort of level, but it's good enough to maintain consistency at a medium scale or a small scale project. How to understand and include the topics that are relevant to the problem statement while including a user persona. So, Sanjana, this is a very large question, but how to understand and include topics would be defined by a problem statement itself. If your problem statement revolves around health or e-commerce, then maybe you've seen those word clouds that you do. So you could take a word and then you make a cloud around it of related terms. That might be a good way to start of brainstorming topics that are relevant to your statement. Sometimes it just needs a brainstorm with a group of people to sort of make sure you're covering all ground. And you'll never be able to cover all ground ever, and that's okay. As a founder, how did you go about learning stuff in the beginning necessary to only stick to design? Absolutely not. I have never stuck to design. I think that all designers should explore all kinds of other topics: psychology, economy, math, statistics, physics. So much inspiration of design comes from physics. You've seen the latest Apple UI, a lot of controversy around it, but a lot of those elements have come from physics and optics, right? They really physically created things and then converted into the UI. So I believe that like I have done the same as a leader in this industry. I have explored all kinds of very unrelated things. At the end of the day, you will realize that everything connects to each other, and it's always useful to try something completely unrelated for sure.
Also, Shravani, we can just take two more because of time restrictions.
Yes, yes, awesome. Do you want me to select something specific? There's a lot of them, so.
Anything that you would like to answer? Apart from that,
Let
all of
me
you
check.
can definitely reach out to Shravani on LinkedIn. She'll message you back. You can have a nice conversation with her.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to do that. Um, how do you balance user needs and business goals? I think that's a very important question. I will take that question. So, it's a thin line, but at the end of the day, it depends on context. If you are working in a, let's say, social context, in the sense that your product is just for social well-being or environment well-being or something like that, and you're user oriented, then just thinking of the user sometimes is good enough. But of course, viability, business viability is important to understand. And a good design solution will be a balance of both. So it's part of the design process to understand the goals of the business, because that's how your product is going to sort of keep going. Unless it makes business sense, it's not going to make sense for the user either, right? If we take an example of Dunzo, you see that Dunzo is sort of gone almost. We don't see it working too much now. It might be because of many, many parameters, but important to keep business goals in mind and then optimize as much as possible for your users. At the end of the day, you have to understand that designing for the users is something we are doing for the business itself. So if users adapt to a product, then it makes business value. And that balance is never a balance. It's actually just a coming to terms with it sort of a situation where you get the best of both worlds and make optimized decisions to make sure both parties are happy, right? Um, let's see what else is there. How can we present entire UI UX process in a presentation without making it too long or overwhelming? I'm going to take that as the last one because it might be relevant for the hackathon that we're going to be working on. I think that you don't need to present the entire process all the time. It's important to stick to the story and the solution in this case. Process is important so that you talk about insights at each stage. So don't try to communicate everything you've done. Try to get some learning of it or growth out of it and present the actual solution of the story. The solution is not just the screens like you guys at this point are, I think, aligned to. It's the complete solution that you're thinking of, and the app on the screen will be part of that solution, right? So storytelling is very important in presentations. Visual elements are important, but at the same time, clarity is important. You can use GPT for it, but make sure it's clear enough. It talks to you like a person. It's not like cut out of the mold because everyone else's will probably be like that. So how can you make it unique? How can you put it in your own personality to it? Will be the value that you add to the presentation, right? As a group, right? So I hope that answers all of some of the questions. There are a lot of them.
Yes. All of you who have any
Okay.
remaining questions, you can reach out to her. And Shravani,
Yes,
thank you so much for doing this. I'm sure this session
absolutely.
was very, very helpful for everyone. I think, yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you,
Perfect.
everyone, for joining in and attending the session
Thank
so
you.
patiently.
Wait.
Okay.
Before everyone leaves, let's take a photo with
Sure.
Shravani ma'am. Give me 1 second. Let me pin myself and let me change the view to so that we can get everyone in. Yeah, perfect. All right, ma'am. Three. Ria, ready?
Yes.
Ma'am, ready?
Yes.
3, 2, 1, go. Guys, do add stories, tag Moonfish, tag yeah, you can only tag Moonfish because Shravani ma'am does not. Ma'am,
Monsoon
any
fish,
any
that
any
is.
reason why you are not
Monsoon fish.
Yes,
Monsoon
yeah,
fish.
yeah, really sorry. Monsoon Fish. I'm asking why are you not active on Insta?
Yeah, I can't handle it, man. I just can't handle it. It's a lot of information.
Makes sense,
I
makes sense.
prefer to get my information from Ria most of the times. So
Thank you so much, ma'am, for doing this, and
thank you.
that's it.
All right. Thanks, guys, for
Thank you,
joining and
guys.
listening
Bye
to me.
bye.
Guys, see
Bye-bye.
you all at 8 p.m. We have the second session with Akshita, ma'am.
Bye bye.